Whitney Houston was called overrated by a music critic. Moments later, the critic asked for an interview. The setup. The year was 1993, and the music world was a kaleidoscope of grunge, hip-hop, and the enduring power of pop divas. At the epicenter of the latter stood Whitney Houston, a force of nature whose voice had become synonymous with perfection. Her album For the Bodyguard soundtrack had not just broken records, it had shattered them, becoming one of the best-selling albums of all time. I Will Always Love You was more than a song. It was a global anthem, a vocal masterclass that left listeners breathless and critics scrambling for new superlatives. Whitney was at the absolute zenith of her powers, her voice a shimmering instrument capable of conveying raw emotion with unparalleled technical brilliance. She was the golden standard, the voice against which all others were measured, a true American icon. Yet, even at such dizzying heights, shadows lurked. The music industry, ever hungry for controversy and new narratives, often turned on its darlings. There was a growing undercurrent of cynicism, a desire to dissect and deconstruct what was universally adored. Enter Arthur Finch. Arthur Finch was not just a music critic, he was an institution. With a career spanning 3 decades, his words had the power to launch careers or, more often, to deliver a scathing verdict that could linger like a bad taste. Finch wrote for Melody in Verse, a venerable music magazine known for its intellectual rigor and often its contrarian stance. He was a man of sharp intellect, a connoisseur of jazz and blues, and a staunch advocate for what he considered authentic artistry. He disdained what he perceived as manufactured pop, the slick productions that prioritized commercial appeal over raw, unvarnished talent. His reviews were legendary for their brutal honesty, laced with a wit that could cut deeper than any insult. He had famously dismissed a critically acclaimed rock album as the sound of 1,000 guitars weeping for their lost souls, and once described a popular R&B group as a vocal quartet whose harmonies were as thin as their lyrical content. Finch saw himself as a guardian of musical integrity, a bulwark against the tide of commercialism. He believed that true art should challenge, provoke, and evolve, not merely entertain. And in his eyes, Whitney Houston, despite her undeniable vocal gifts, had become the epitome of the latter. Her music, while technically flawless, felt to him increasingly polished, predictable, and, dare he say, safe. He yearned for the grit, the rawness, the unexpected turns that defined the artists he truly admired. He saw her as a product of a system that valued spectacle over substance, a voice so perfect it had become almost sterile. The tension in the industry was palpable. On one side, the masses adored Whitney, her voice a balm, her presence regal. On the other, a segment of critics, led by figures like Finch, began to whisper about the sameness of her sound, the perceived lack of artistic growth, the overwhelming commercial success that, to them, somehow diminished her artistic merit. It was a classic battle, the populist appeal versus the intellectual critique. Finch, with his sharp pen and even sharper tongue, was poised to ignite the powder keg. He had been stewing for months, watching Whitney's omnipresence, listening to I Will Always Love You on an endless loop on every radio station, and feeling a growing sense of artistic frustration. He felt it was his duty, his calling, to speak truth to power, even if that power was the most beloved voice in the world. He believed that someone had to puncture the bubble of adulation, to offer a dissenting voice in a chorus of praise. He was preparing his next column, a piece he knew would be controversial, but one he felt was necessary. The stage was set for a collision of titans, the undisputed queen of pop and the industry's most feared critic. The air was thick with anticipation, though no one, least of all Whitney, could have predicted the storm that was about to break. The storm broke not in the pages of Melody in Verse, but on national television, during a live segment of Music Matters, a popular talk show dedicated to dissecting the week's biggest musical events. Arthur Finch was a regular panelist, his sharp insights and often provocative opinions a guaranteed ratings booster. The topic of the night was the enduring phenomenon of the Bodyguard soundtrack and Whitney Houston's unparalleled success. The other panelists, a mix of industry insiders and pop culture commentators, were effusive in their praise, detailing her vocal range, her emotional delivery, and her undeniable impact. Then it was Finch's turn. The host, a genial man named David Sterling, turned to him with a knowing smile. "Arthur, you've been unusually quiet tonight. What are your thoughts on Whitney Houston's current reign? Is she truly the voice of a generation, as so many claim?" Finch adjusted his spectacles, a slight smirk playing on his lips. He leaned into the microphone, his voice calm, measured, but with an underlying steel. "David, with all due respect to the sheer commercial juggernaut that is Miss Houston, I find myself increasingly underwhelmed." A collective gasp rippled through the studio audience. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. David Sterling's smile faltered. "Underwhelmed, Arthur?" Sterling prompted, trying to maintain his composure. "She's selling millions, breaking records, inspiring millions with that voice." "Indeed," Finch conceded, a dismissive wave of his hand. "And that's precisely the problem. Her voice, while technically proficient, has become a gilded cage. It's all power, all spectacle, all precision. But where is the soul? Where's the grit? Where is the unexpected vulnerability that truly elevates an artist?" He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Frankly, I find her to be profoundly overrated. A vocal athlete, perhaps, but an artist? I'm not so sure. She's become a machine, churning out perfectly executed, yet ultimately sterile, performances. It's a triumph of engineering over genuine artistry." The words hit like a thunderclap. Overrated. The most beloved voice in the world, dismissed as overrated on live national television. The studio audience erupted in a mix of boos and gasps. The other panelists immediately jumped in, attempting to defend Whitney, to temper Finch's harsh assessment. But the damage was done. Finch sat back, a look of defiant satisfaction on his face, as if he had just delivered a necessary truth, regardless of its unpopularity. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The phone lines at Music Matters lit up, jammed with angry callers. Social media, still in its nascent stages but rapidly growing, buzzed with outrage. Fan forums exploded with vitriol directed at Finch. Other critics, some secretly agreeing with Finch but unwilling to brave the public backlash, either remained silent or issued carefully worded statements defending Whitney's artistry. Radio stations debated the comments endlessly. The headline, "Whitney Houston, Overrated?" screamed from tabloids and entertainment news shows. For Whitney, who was watching the show from her hotel room after a grueling recording session, the words were a punch to the gut. She had faced criticism before, but never so public, so dismissive, so utterly personal. Overrated. It stung. It questioned not just her latest album, but her entire artistic identity, her very essence as a singer. She felt a surge of anger, then a profound sadness. How could someone so casually dismiss years of dedication, passion, and undeniable talent? The industry, which had celebrated her so fiercely, now seemed to allow such a blatant disrespect to go unchallenged. The incident became a defining moment, a flashpoint in the ongoing debate about commercial success versus artistic merit. Finch, for his part, remained unrepentant, even doubling down on his stance in a follow-up interview with a radio station, stating, "Someone has to say it. The emperor has no clothes, no matter how beautifully she sings." The public was divided, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of fierce loyalty to Whitney. The stage was now set for an inevitable confrontation, a clash between the critic who dared to speak his mind and the icon whose voice had touched millions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into music history and the drama behind the scenes, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more untold stories and critical analyses. The days following Arthur Finch's televised declaration were a whirlwind of public outrage and private turmoil for Whitney Houston. Her team was furious, urging her to issue a scathing rebuttal, to dismiss Finch as a bitter, irrelevant pundit. But Whitney, despite her initial anger, was a woman of immense grace and quiet strength. She chose not to engage publicly, believing her music spoke for itself. Yet, the word overrated gnawed at her, a persistent, unwelcome echo in her mind. It wasn't just a critique of her voice. It felt like a dismissal of her heart, her effort, her very being. The opportunity for a confrontation arose unexpectedly, a week later, at the annual Music Industry Gala. a glittering affair where the biggest names in music gathered to celebrate their achievements. Whitney, looking resplendent in a custom-designed gown, arrived with her entourage, a picture of poise and regal beauty. Arthur Finch, a familiar figure in his impeccably tailored suit, was also present, mingling with fellow critics and industry executives, seemingly unfazed by the storm he had unleashed. The ballroom was a symphony of chatter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz. Whitney was making her way through a throng of well-wishers when she spotted him across the room, standing near the bar, a glass of scotch in hand, engaged in an animated conversation. Her heart quickened. Her publicist, sensing her gaze, tried to steer her in another direction. "Whitney, darling, let's head to the VIP lounge. Clive is waiting." But Whitney shook her head, a determined glint in her eyes. "No, I need to speak with him." She moved with purpose, her presence parting the crowd like the Red Sea. As she approached, Finch's conversation partner, a nervous-looking record executive, noticed her first. His eyes widened, and he quickly excused himself, leaving Finch alone. Finch turned, sensing the sudden silence, and found himself face-to-face with Whitney Houston. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Whitney stood tall, her gaze unwavering, a mixture of hurt and defiance in her eyes. Finch, for the first time, seemed momentarily taken aback. He had expected a publicist, a lawyer, perhaps even a scathing statement. He had not expected Whitney herself. "Mr. Finch," Whitney's voice was low, controlled, but carried an undeniable power. "I believe we need to talk." Finch recovered quickly, his usual composure returning. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible bow. "Ms. Houston, an unexpected pleasure, though I imagine not for you." "No, not entirely," Whitney admitted, a wry twist to her lips. "I heard your comments on music matters." "Overrated, I believe was the word you used." "It was," Finch confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. "And I stand by it. My role, Ms. Houston, is to offer an honest assessment, not to join a chorus of sycophants." "Honest, perhaps," Whitney countered, her voice rising slightly, but also dismissive. "Do you truly believe that the millions of people who connect with my music, who find solace or joy in my voice, are simply mistaken? That their emotional response is invalid because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of artistry?" Finch took a sip of his scotch. "Emotional response is one thing, Miss Houston. Artistic merit is another. Your voice is a marvel, technically, but it has become predictable. Safe. Where's the risk? Where's the raw, unpolished vulnerability that truly moves the soul? It's all polish, all perfection. And perfection, in art, can often be sterile." Whitney's eyes flashed. "Sterile? Do you know what it takes to stand on a stage, night after night, and pour your entire being into a song? To connect with thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of people, and make them feel something real? That's not sterile, Mr. Finch. That's a communion. That's a gift." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the depth of her emotion. "And to dismiss it as overrated is not just a critique of my singing. It's a dismissal of my heart, my passion, my very soul." The conversation had drawn the attention of those nearby. Whispers rippled through the room. Flashbulbs began to pop discreetly. This was the confrontation everyone had secretly hoped for, playing out in real time. Finch, seeing the raw emotion in her eyes, felt a flicker of something he rarely experienced: discomfort. He had expected anger, perhaps a diva tantrum. He had not expected such genuine hurt, such a passionate defense of her artistic integrity. He had always prided himself on his objectivity, but in that moment, facing the woman whose voice had moved millions, he felt a crack in his carefully constructed critical armor. He had judged the product, but perhaps he had overlooked the person, the immense effort, the profound connection. "Perhaps," Finch said, his voice softer now, "my words were blunt. My intention was to provoke a discussion about the state of popular music, not to diminish your undeniable talent, Miss Houston." He paused, looking at her, truly looking at her, for the first time beyond the headlines and the album covers. "But I hear your passion, and I respect it." The tension in the room, which had been almost unbearable, eased slightly. Whitney, still hurt, but sensing a shift, simply nodded. The encounter ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, uneasy truce. Both knew something significant had just transpired, a moment that would reverberate far beyond the gala ballroom. What do you think about Whitney's decision to confront Finch directly? Was it the right move, or should she have let her music speak for itself? Leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. The encounter with Whitney Houston at the music industry gala left Arthur Finch profoundly unsettled. He had walked into that ballroom with his critical armor firmly in place, ready to defend his controversial stance. He had anticipated anger, perhaps even a public dressing down from her management. What he hadn't anticipated was the raw, unvarnished emotion in Whitney's eyes, the genuine hurt in her voice as she defended her artistry. Her words, "It's a dismissal of my heart, my passion, my very soul," echoed in his mind long after he had left the gala. Finch was a man who prided himself on his intellectual rigor, his ability to dissect and analyze music with clinical precision. He believed in the separation of art from artist, of product from person. But Whitney's directness had blurred those lines. He had seen not just a pop star, but a human being, deeply invested in her craft, wounded by his public dismissal. He had always viewed her as a symbol of commercialized perfection, a voice that had sacrificed soul for polish. But in that brief, intense exchange, he had glimpsed the soul he claimed was missing. The public backlash continued, of course. His phone rang incessantly with interview requests, most of them eager to fan the flames of controversy. His editor at Melody and Verse was secretly thrilled with the increased circulation, but even he suggested Finch might want to tone down the rhetoric for a bit. Finch, however, found himself in a different kind of dilemma. His conviction, once so absolute, now felt complicated. He spent the next few days in a state of introspection, something rare for the usually self-assured critic. He listened to Whitney's earlier work, the gospel-infused power of her debut, the soaring ballads that had first captivated the world. He tried to listen with fresh ears, stripping away his preconceived notions, his disdain for commercial success. He focused on the nuances, the subtle inflections, the sheer vocal command that was undeniably present. He still found some of her later work too slick, too produced for his taste, but he couldn't deny the immense talent, the undeniable connection she forged with her audience. He realized that his critique, while perhaps valid in its intellectual framework, had been delivered with a bluntness that bordered on cruelty. He had focused so intently on what he perceived as a lack of artistic risk that he had overlooked the profound impact she had on millions, the sheer joy and inspiration her voice provided. Was his definition of artistry too narrow? Was he so caught up in his own intellectual purity that he had become blind to the power of popular art? The thought gnawed at him. Had he been unfair? Had he allowed his personal preferences to overshadow his critical responsibility? He had always believed in challenging the status quo, but had he, in this instance, simply been dismissive? A new idea began to form in his mind, a radical departure from his usual modus operandi. It was a way to address his internal conflict, to perhaps even bridge the chasm he had created. He decided he needed to understand Whitney Houston, the artist, the person, beyond the headlines and the sound bites. He needed to hear her story, her perspective, unfiltered. He picked up the phone and called his editor. "I want to do an interview," he stated, his voice firm. "An interview? With whom, Arthur? Another indie band no one's heard of?" his editor quipped. "No," Finch replied, a hint of something akin to humility in his tone. "With Whitney Houston." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Whitney Houston? Arthur, after what you said, she'll never agree. Her publicist will laugh you off the phone." "Perhaps," Finch conceded, "but I have to try. I believe there's a story there, a deeper conversation to be had about artistry, success, and the role of the critic. And I believe I'm the one who needs to have it." He explained his reasoning, the unexpected encounter, his shift in perspective. His editor, sensing a potentially groundbreaking piece that would undoubtedly sell millions of copies, cautiously agreed to facilitate the request. It was a long shot, a monumental task, but Finch felt compelled. He needed to understand, and perhaps, to atone. This unexpected turn of events, from scathing criticism to a request for an interview, is truly fascinating. What do you think prompted Finch's change of heart? Was it genuine introspection, or a strategic move? Like the video if you're intrigued by this development, and leave a comment sharing your theories. The request for an interview, coming from Arthur Finch, The very critic who had publicly labeled her overrated sent shockwaves through Whitney Houston's camp. Her publicist was vehemently against it. "He's trying to capitalize on the controversy, Whitney. Don't give him the satisfaction." But Whitney, after much deliberation, saw something different. She saw an opportunity to speak her truth, to challenge his perceptions directly, and perhaps to show the world the depth of her artistry beyond the surface-level critiques. She agreed, under one condition. The interview would be conducted by Finch himself, and it would be published in its entirety, unedited, in melody and verse. The interview took place a few weeks later, in a quiet, sunlit studio in Los Angeles. The atmosphere was tense but respectful. Finch, armed with a notepad and a tape recorder, looked less like a firebrand critic and more like a scholar. Whitney, dressed simply but elegantly, exuded a calm confidence. Finch began by acknowledging his previous comments. "Miss Houston, I want to start by saying that my intention was never to personally attack you, but to critique what I perceived as a trend in popular music. However, our brief encounter at the gala made me realize that my words, while perhaps intellectually sound to me, had a profound human impact. I'm here to listen, to understand your perspective on artistry, success, and the challenges you face." Whitney nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I appreciate that. When you called me overrated, it felt like a dismissal of everything I've worked for, everything I pour into my music. You spoke of sterile perfection, but what you hear as perfection is the result of years of dedication, discipline, and a profound spiritual connection to the music. My voice is a gift, and I treat it with reverence. I strive for excellence, not just for myself, but for the audience who trusts me to deliver." They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Whitney articulated her artistic philosophy, her gospel roots, the immense pressure of maintaining her vocal instrument, and the delicate balance between artistic integrity and commercial demands. She spoke of the joy she found in connecting with millions, the responsibility she felt to uplift and inspire. She explained that for her, risk wasn't about experimental sounds, but about the emotional vulnerability she brought to each note, the courage it took to stand before the world and lay her soul bare through song. Finch listened intently, asking probing questions, but also allowing her space to speak freely. He learned about the meticulous vocal warm-ups, the hours of rehearsal, the spiritual journey that informed her performances. He began to see that what he had dismissed as polish was, in fact, a deeply intentional and highly skilled form of communication, a conduit for profound emotion. He realized that his definition of artistry had been too narrow, too focused on a particular aesthetic, and had failed to account for the immense power of a voice that could transcend genres and touch the universal human experience. When the interview concluded, there was a palpable shift in the room. Finch looked at Whitney, not as a pop star to be critiqued, but as a formidable artist and a thoughtful human being. "Miss Houston," he said, closing his notepad, "I came here to understand. And I believe I have. Thank you for your honesty." The article, when it was published, was unlike anything Finch had ever written. It was titled Beyond the Voice, a conversation with Whitney Houston. It didn't retract his original overrated comment, but it contextualized it, offering a nuanced perspective that acknowledged his previous stance while also celebrating Whitney's profound artistry and impact. He wrote about her dedication, her spiritual connection to music, and the immense power of her voice to move and inspire. He admitted that his critical lens had been too narrow, and that he had learned a valuable lesson about the multifaceted nature of artistic expression. The article was a sensation. It didn't just sell out melody and verse. It sparked a new conversation about music criticism itself. Fans felt vindicated. Critics were forced to reevaluate their own biases, and Whitney Houston's legacy was further cemented, not just as a vocal powerhouse, but as an artist of immense depth and integrity who could even disarm her harshest critic. The incident became a testament to Whitney's grace and strength, and to Finch's willingness to evolve. It taught the industry that true artistry could withstand even the most brutal critiques, and that sometimes the most profound understanding comes from stepping outside one's own preconceived notions. It was a moment that transcended a simple review, becoming a powerful narrative about respect, dialogue, and the enduring power of a truly exceptional voice. If you found this story compelling and insightful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the untold stories of music legends.